G'day, welcome. Stephen Travis here. In this live session, we're looking at what are the things that stop our drawing improvement? What are the things that hold us back from getting to the drawing place we want to be? Now, just a day and a half ago, I posted a poll on my channel community page, and over 100 people replied, which was great. And thank you to everyone who did. So I thought we would use the results, which fell into 12 broad areas. But I thought before I did that, I'll tell you what was for me biggest impediment to my drawing improvement. And I thought about this for a while, and it's not something that really came up in any of the answers to the poll. But I think the thing that held back my drawing improvement was a resistance to doing things differently, a resistance to trying things new. And I think it was partly related to a lot of things, partly related to perhaps thinking I was already doing it the best way I could, partly thinking I couldn't do that or I couldn't do it that way or whatever. But once I locked into a way of doing my drawing, of starting and progressing a drawing, it was very hard to change that process. And in fact, I've changed the process many times since. And excuse me, one of the fun things I do is to shake up what I do. So I do like a 10-minute drawing, as I did in one of my last videos, where something I took 20 minutes to draw, which is already a very fast time to draw, I drew the same thing in half the time. And we learn things that pushes things. But probably the biggest step I took in improving my drawing was to switch from pencil to pen, not because there's anything wrong with pencil drawing. Graphite is a beautiful medium, but I found it was making me become too dependent on erasers. My natural tendency to want things to be perfect did not go well with using a medium that I could endlessly remove what I've done and try again. And sometimes the paper just would get so messed up it would almost be, half the thickness. And I also wanted the freedom of being able to draw in pen. And I think that's really was a really important step forward, because once I couldn't erase, it forced me to pay more attention to a lot of things in a much more focused, sharper way. So for me, that was one of the ways that I think I stepped through what was blocking me from improving, by doing things differently, and particularly by switching from pencil to pen. So I really had to learn to be braver than I was. And I also got to learn lots of great lessons about making mistakes and how they're not so bad. And most mistakes that I make, I seem to be able to fix mostly before we get to the end, and all the things that I've talked about in my videos. So that was the thing that for me really changed things in terms of my drawing acceleration, my drawing pace of improving. That changing the way I did things, not for the sake of change, but not holding back because I was afraid or I just felt comfortable and didn't want to take any risks. So yeah, look, welcome everyone. There's a number of people here. Thank you, the ones who are waiting. I might try and in future give a little bit of warning, as I did tonight, just through my community page, of once I know for sure that I'm going live. So sorry about the last couple of weeks, but just things kept happening and I was really just too exhausted, to be honest. So welcome. And yeah, welcome everyone. Yep, Gangster Boy saying that pen looks so much better to the eye than just grey lines. Look, it depends what you're doing and how you're doing it. There's wonderful subtlety with graphite that we can't get in the same way with pencil. I think the problem with pencil, though, is it's easy to draw very, well, insipid looking, well, I guess, grey line drawings. But if we push the values that we can get, and the fact that with pencil we can have line as well as basically just tone, almost like ink, it gives us a lot of possibilities. I think the problem is that a lot of people draw with pencil and are too timid to really push those possibilities, or they feel that if they're drawing with pencil, they use the same pencil from start to finish, rather than using a range of pencils to really push the beautiful darks that you can get. Um, Debbie's is wasting good quality paper if doesn't use pencil first. And that's a good reason, Debbie, to use paper that you can afford to waste, because it will hold back your drawing improvement. And yeah, that's, I think, a really important thing. We don't want our materials to be more valuable to us than our ability just to take risks and to draw and to experiment. So, hi, Amy, you've joined us. Yep, great. So I looked at the, I don't know, about 110, 120 results to my poll. Thank you for everyone who answered the question of what is it that's holding you back? What is it that's holding you back from drawing improvement? And look, Assad, fountain pencil. I've never used a fountain pen for drawing. I haven't used a fountain pen for writing since I was about 9 years old at school. But just lately, I've been looking at some of the drawings of people who draw with fountain pens, particularly Paul Heaston on Instagram. If you haven't looked at his work, it's phenomenal. And it's made me want to use at least try and experiment with a fountain pen. So yeah, it's in my to-do very soon list. So let's start looking at what the 12 reasons people gave in this poll were. And I'm going to start at number 12 and work up to number 1. Now I've grouped some of them. Some of them were sort of slightly different, but I felt had a core commonality. So I've grouped those. But coming in at number 12 was inconsistency. And yeah, that just had a couple of people who said that was a problem, but inconsistency, and I presume it's to do with inconsistency in actually sitting down to draw, and possibly inconsistency with effort that's put in, but a lack of consistency. Consistency in anything we're trying to improve at is important, whether it's improve our diet or exercise or to learn a skill. So that was number 12. Now, we had 3 with the same number, which therefore become number 9. There are 3 number 9s. And the first one of these was, so these ones all had 3 votes each. The first one was generally, it was mental health issues, so things like anxiety and depression. So not particularly connected with drawing, but more general life kind of issues. So yeah, that was very honest of people to say for us. Another one coming in with 3 votes was number 9. For number 9 was distractions. So these were people who were saying, I could have more time, but I give it to other things. I want to draw, but I get distracted by YouTube or just other possibilities, other creative skills, other endeavors. So that was the second one of for number 9. And the third one that also had 3 takers was attempting subjects that were too difficult to draw. And that is another, I mean, they're all important things. They're all real things, and they're all real things that stop us from improving. And it doesn't, I mean, I'm just ranking them in 1 to 10 for interest, or 1 to 12 for interest, but any one of them will have the same negative impact if it's your one, if it's your main one. And so, yes, but drawing things that are too hard means that we can't learn to draw things well, because we're not drawing things well. I always, if you've probably heard this in some of my videos, but I think it's important that we pitch our level where we can succeed, where we have a chance at least of doing something that looks reasonably good. Because If we don't, then we get practiced at drawings that aren't very good, and we do improve at what we keep doing. So if what we keep doing is drawings that aren't very good, then we get better at doing drawings that aren't very good. So it's important to stretch ourselves too, of course, but we can't rush to the end. We can't be kind of, just because something is exciting and someone else did a really good drawing of it or in a certain style, doesn't mean it's an appropriate place for us to try and draw at that point. Because just for motivation too, we want to have, it's nice to feel that we've done good drawings. And that motivation, I think, is probably important in the long run as well. I'll just have a quick look at some of the comments. Yeah, very true. I just fear line art being too weak. Yep. And improved due to my canvas sizes. Right. I presume you mean painting, Saeed. But yeah, can't decide and get frozen in terms of large or small. And I painted very large and very small, and I found it was nice going from one to the other. And there were different skills that I could use on different ones back in the day when I was painting. The next impediments to improvement is again a tie. So we have two number sevens. We have two coming in with 5 votes each. And one of them, 5 people spoke about, it was a phrase that one of them used, which I've adopted for this, which was their inner critic being judging and comparing, and a harsh voice within, saying you're not as good as this person, or you're not very good at this, or you're wasting your time. And if any of us ever feel that we have a harsh voice, a very critical, unhelpfully critical voice speaking to us, I think it's important that we replace it with a kinder voice, and that we make an effort to do so, because I think the words that we hear do change us. And even if they're words we're saying to ourselves, we want to make every effort to stop saying them, and we can't help what we start to think. But perhaps we can choose to say no, and then to actually say some more positive things about what we're doing to ourselves, to replace the harsh voice with an encouraging one. Perhaps what we'd like someone else to be saying to us if they were there. And the other one with number 7 was a lack of motivation. Now, in each case, that was all that was said, lack of motivation. So I'm not exactly sure. But this is from people who are wanting to draw and who are wanting to improve in drawing, but somehow just can't get their act together to actually do it. Maybe it's a nice notional thought. They'd really like to be able to do some drawings, but just can't actually connect with all the things you need to connect with to start. So lack of motivation. Is that a problem for you? Okay. Now we're coming up to, again, another tie with 7 people each saying this. So this is number 5, equal placed to 2 number 5s out of 12. And the first one is not actually knowing where to start. So sitting down, having a drawing, having a reference, looking at it, and just being confused as to where to put the pen on the paper and what to try and draw at the start. And so that can be a real problem, because then you start to hesitate, and it can connect with other issues as well. So is that a problem that you face? Maybe that would be a good video. Would you like me to do a video on how I decide where to draw, where to start drawing, and how I start drawing? It's something I often mention in passing in my voiceovers when I do a drawing demo, but maybe that could be a good video just on its own. I'm not sure that I've done one. I may have done one on that almost at the very start of my video, so it's long buried in my catalog. So that was one of the number fives, not knowing where to actually start, where to put the pen on paper, and what to do. And then the other one is the other one that's had 7 responses, equal number 5, is impatience. Who can sympathize with impatience, just wanting to get to the end before they've begun, um, really pushing too far. And I think this partly, I mean, some of these do overlap. I think sometimes drawing subjects that are too challenging for us can be because we are impatient. We want to have, we feel like we've got these things in us, this creativity, this level of skill, potentially at least in us, and we're just so keen to get there that we rush. And of course, I mean, a fast gestural style can be a great thing, but even that can be rushed. It's not so much the speed in itself, but it's whether the speed we're going is appropriate for what we're trying to get, for the result we're trying to get. Um, okay, so that was the 2 equal 5s. Point number 4. So we're coming into the home run, and I'll share again. I did share at the start, but I'll share again when I finish these ones, what my largest impediment was, and then hopefully I can have some more thoughts from some of the people watching right now on the chat. But number 4 is lack of time. And a couple of people specifically mentioned that school takes up way too much time and doesn't leave enough time for your own personal artwork. So if you're going to school, you can probably empathize with how much time school can take up. Um, but otherwise, people are just busy and really want to sit down and draw, but just can't squeeze it in easily when there's work, and perhaps there's family, and there's meals, and there's just other responsibilities, caring responsibilities, and so forth. So yeah, all those. Okay, point number 3, and yeah, you'll either get this or not, but it's how many people? 11 people said it's just hard to sit down and start. Now, they weren't saying it was hard to find the time to sit down and start, but they're saying that when they've decided to draw and they're going to sit down and start, that somehow there's this immobilization of their mind or what, and it's just really hard to sit down and do it. And I suspect that it's connected with a lot of with fear in some way, that there's a fear that the enjoyable experience that they're wanting is not going to happen. So that's that one. That was number 3. Number 2, the second biggest reason why people think they're not improving is because of their fear of wrecking their drawing or ruining their drawing. And so they hold back, I assume, or just don't draw much, that start drawings, and certainly don't finish drawings. And again, you might have heard me make the point, there's lots of things we learn in the second half of a drawing that we can't learn if we never get to the second half of the drawing. And so I think that also is a big problem. But we become afraid that what we're doing is going to look bad. And I used to find this when I was very young. I mean, I had 30 years where I did practically nothing artistic, because of all sorts of issues that I had to get over. But yeah, I found it very hard with painting, where you have to do all this underpainting, and of course it looked terrible because you can't even see the finished product with oil paint until you've painted layer over layer, and yeah, how does that go when you need it to look right straight away? Now drawing a little bit more gives you that ability, but I think, yeah, yeah. But really, we work at drawings and we progress a whole drawing, and so we can't see at the start how it's going to look at the end, and even things that we don't like at the start, by the time we get to the end, we can often hidden them to a large degree. So, I think that is a really big problem. And also, I mean, presumably, if we're drawing, it's because we want it to give us pleasure. We see it as being a meaningful, satisfying, pleasurable, enjoyable activity for us. But if as soon as we start, we're afraid of making mistakes, and that at some point in the process causes us to freeze or to not do things as perhaps that will help us get to where we want to go, then it's just, why then are we doing it if we just feel so tense? Well, we're doing it because we really want to, but we have this impediment of fear getting in the way. And number one, the largest one, the biggest problem with 23, so almost 1 in 4 of everyone who answered, the main reason why they feel that they can't improve in their drawing is coming from a lack of guidance or a lack of direction. They just don't know what they're meant to be doing. They're not sure of how to start. They're not sure of how to improve what they're doing. They don't have anyone to point out what's working, to critique their artwork. They yeah, just in different ways, lacking guidance, lacking a teacher. So yeah, that made me feel a bit sad as a as a teacher, that people would feel that that their work was suffering, their ability to progress was suffering because they lacked guidance. So I mean, I guess all I can say is I hope my videos do make a difference there for people, do make it possible to progress past where you could have progressed yourself. It's difficult because obviously my videos don't necessarily, the artworks I do in my videos don't necessarily connect with where any one person is up to or what any one person is wanting to learn or needing to learn. G'day, Benji. But yeah, but hopefully there are some positives in that. There are some things in them. But equally, I think certainly my videos, I have a large range of them, and so they're hopefully some should be, yeah. Probably the thing I lack most is really basic videos. I have a couple. Why do you think we are subscribed? Yes, well, thank you. That's great. Doodling, listening to the stream. Yep. That's a good idea. Yeah. Well, I hope, but yeah. Well, I'm glad that that my level of guidance is connecting with you, but it really won't connect with everyone, and it won't be everyone's fault. It won't be my fault or anyone else's. It's just that we're in different places, and also where we want to go is different. So for people who want to draw, say, freehand in pen with a reasonably large amount of realism in their work, and particularly if they like urban landscape type subjects, then my videos are going to be particularly helpful. They're going to be less helpful for people who want to improve their charcoal portraiture, for instance. Although there are some principles about learning and about drawing that overlap in all of those. So yeah, I started this. If you've just come on, I've just gone through the 12 reasons in order that people gave in the poll I posted a couple of days ago about what impedes their drawing improvement. And I started with saying what I think the biggest impediment to my drawing improvement was when I started drawing again after my teenage years, and that's I didn't want to take risks. I was very, very conservative, and once I did something a certain way, I didn't want to push it. I didn't want to try something different because it might not turn out, and so I would stay with what was safe. And yeah, yeah, I really had to get over that. And basically, the reason I started drawing in pen and started to draw freehand in pen was because I was getting tighter and tighter, I felt, with my pencil work, and it had to become more and more perfect. And I felt like I was erasing more lines than I was leaving by the end of the drawing. And I was looking at some of the ink work of some of the artists I follow on Instagram, and I just love the beautiful clean lines that they had. And but I thought it was going to be impossible for me to do that. I really did. And I could have just sat there playing it safe using my eraser and not have learned the way to go if I want to draw freehand. And instead I pushed and stepped out, and yeah, look, it's worked really well for me. But um, yeah, but it really, I stuck with the pencil for quite a while when I was wanting to switch to ink, because it was just safer to stay with what I know. And that's why I think it's always helpful to shake things up every now and then, simply for the sake of shaking them up. So if we normally draw very small, draw a larger picture, or vice versa. If we normally take 6 hours to do a drawing, then do one in 10 minutes. Or if we normally take 30 minutes to do a drawing, try and find 3 hours to do a drawing. If we never use tone, we never use value markers or anything, then do that sometimes. If we never do hatching, try hatching. I mean, I think all of these things are really important if we want to improve in our drawing. Spruce is saying, let's all join the Inktober challenge and share with each other's results. Well, I don't know how that gets particularly shared on Instagram, but on YouTube, but certainly on Instagram, Inktober is a big deal. So have I ever done digital? No, I have never done a digital anything. I've got a good friend, and he does a lot of digital work, and I think it's amazing. But I don't know, I feel like there's still more I want to do with what I'm doing. And so I'm happy to let other people concentrate on that. And I'm sure there are many people who their first artworks, their first drawings are digital drawings, and their whole drawing life will be a digital one, which I think is great. And yeah, they will discover things, and they will push boundaries, and yeah, do great artworks. But I think for me, because enjoyment's an important part too, I think there's more to enjoy just with the possibilities that exist with what do you call non-digital art? I don't think you call it analog art. Yeah, but maybe if someone knows, they can say that's very kind of you. But while I've got you, what guidance would you like me to give you that possibly you think physical art, thanks Ian, that possibly you think I haven't given? Now, so no one say perspective, because I've made a million perspective videos with only slight exaggeration, but and don't ask for teaching on things that subjects I don't do, because I'm not going to start teaching about how to do portraiture or draw horses or things like that, because I don't have experience in that. And there are already better teachers of those subjects where that's their sweet spot, where that's the thing that they love to draw and that they draw all the time. But in terms of the sorts of things I do in terms of subjects or more generalized principles, is there any guidance that you'd like from me that I can possibly give? the basics of form, how to arrange and manipulate primitives. Now, the other thing to say, though, having just said that, is I also don't particularly draw from my imagination. I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do, but my personal enjoyment is to capture something that I see in front of me, and whether that's location sketching or I take a photo and then try and capture something of that. So yeah, yeah. So that's the other thing. Not anything that's too connected with um, digital art. And Benji, look, I'm afraid I haven't got the slightest idea of what you're talking about. The other thing you need to remember is, of course, I have not ever done an art course. I am self-taught. And while I'm a trained teacher, it was English and history. I'm better with nominative predicates than manipulating primitives. I've got no idea what primitives are. So I'll just say that out there. I'm way past the age where I have to impress anyone. So yeah, no idea what that means. But um, uh, made a lot of way to practice it. Yeah, that's true, Ian. Digital art is a great way to practice without using materials, but it does have an expensive upfront cost. And um, and now, of course, you can't even buy the programs. You have to rent them every month, which I reckon's a shocker. Um, why are Aussies just pleasant bunch of people anyway? Well, I think most Aussies know some other Aussies that they wouldn't perhaps describe as pleasant, but I don't know. We think this is a lovely country to live in, but you know, and maybe that makes it easier to be pleasant when the sun shines more often, and we really, except for the bushfires and the sharks and the snakes and all the things that kill you when you sleep, it's a great place. Posting your work and the process as a guidance by. So yeah, look, I hope that is the case. Do you find the voiceovers particularly helpful? It's always a bit hard to know what to say. Yeah, so Ian, for $800, you could have bought a lot of paper and pencils, I imagine. Yeah, but of course you can then use them for a long time as well. So yeah, so that's digital. Oh, look, who knows? Maybe I'll have a go one day. But sometimes I read things, or I just look at things, and I've become aware of layering and yeah, and the fact that you can draw different layers, and then you can remove layers if you want. It's sort of like your underdrawing then just disappears, I think, without having to erase it, and try not to erase the lines that you want to leave there. Yes, I imagine it was. I didn't know there was such a thing as online art contests. My goodness, the world is changing. Yeah. So, any other thoughts about, though, the things that hold us back from improving? I'll just do a quick run through for people who may have missed it. I'll start from the top down this time. So the first one was lack of guidance or direction. The second one was fear of the drawing looking terrible, or of ruining the drawing once we'd started it. The third was hard to sit down to start. The fourth was lack of time. Equal fifth was impatience and not actually knowing where to start the drawing. Sitting there with the reference, with the pen, with the paper, and just kind of, and not so much freezing with fear, but simply being mystified as to the best place to start. That was equal 7. Two at equal 7. 2 for equal 7. Lack of motivation, and an inner critic with a harsh voice judging and comparing and finding fault with what you are doing. There's 3 at equal 9, and the first one was attempting subjects that were beyond your ability to draw well. There was being distracted too much by too many things, and there were just general mental health issues that didn't particularly relate to drawing or creativity, but simply impacted ability to do those things. And then the 12th one was inconsistency. There were 4 others that had 1 vote each, which I just grouped into the other column and left those. But yeah. So, are there any other questions you'd like to ask me? I'm just trying to think. Did I recap on what the impediment to my drawing improvement was? I started with that, but if you didn't come in first, can someone tell me on the chat? I just can't remember whether I said that, or because I was thinking I was going to say it again. I didn't. Okay, thank you. All right. What was my largest impediment to improving? It was I think I did say it twice, but just quickly, it was getting stuck in a rut and not wanting to push and try something new, but just wanting to keep it safe and do what I'd already learnt to do well, but not try new things, not to take the risks. It wasn't that I was afraid of ruining the drawing I was doing, but I didn't want to risk doing something perhaps that wouldn't turn out. And so it was just easier and safer to stick with what I was doing. Yeah. Thanks, John. It's good to hear. How do you find your own style? Look, Debbie, I think this is going to sound like a real cliche, but I think our style finds us. One analogy that I used to use early on when I was doing some blogs on my website was I often think of our drawing style and drawing is a bit like speaking a language and accents, and the way we make sounds, the way we put words together, the rhythms that we speak with, all of these things determine what our voice sounds like and how our language sounds like when we speak. When we draw, we're faced with a lot of creative processes that have to take place. So let's make it easier. I'm looking at a photograph and I want to draw it. Well, it's 2-dimensional, so that makes it easier than drawing something in front of me because that's 3-dimensional. So it's already 2-dimensional. So I'm going to create a 2-dimensional drawing. But there's all these decisions I have to make. How will I represent a certain part of what I see using whatever I'm using, but let's say it's a pen, an ink pen with just a black line on the paper? There are lots of different ways I can do that. Even what do I start with? Where do I start my drawing? Do I complete each little part before I go on? Do I rough things out in some way with a pen, still aware that I can't erase any lines? All of these things will determine what my drawing looks like, the risks that I'm prepared to take, and therefore the ways in which perhaps I might have developed skills or not developed skills and stayed safe. All of these things determine how my drawing looks, the solutions I find, and even where I start and how I start. All of those things determine how my drawing looks, how my line work, the way I think about the marks I make. I've been talking quite a bit about how I've quite intentionally switched my thinking, and I'm trying to now switch my language from talking and thinking of lines and talking and thinking about marks. Because when we think lines, we're far more inclined to put lines, which often means outlines, very quickly without thinking, is this the best way to create the effect? I don't think of myself now when I draw so much as drawing things as creating the effect of things. And I find thinking of marks is a much more productive way of doing that. It gives more flexibility in terms of the scope, a wider scope of possibilities. Now, sometimes marks can be quite small and therefore time consuming. So, for all those people where impatience was a problem, but but it's how we make all of these choices which determines our style, which is why another reason why if we copy the works of other artists, not just do we not learn how to draw, we only learn how to copy, but we actually also don't find our own graphic voice, the way we express on paper something that we're seeing somewhere else. Seeing saying new artists ask about style more than everything else put together. Is that true? Well, yeah, and I guess so, because what often happens is when we look at artists whose work we really like, they have settled into a comfortable style, and it's often quite distinctive. And so they can look at you can look at 5 drawings by 5 different people, and you'll know the work that the artist you particularly like has done just from recognizing the style, because when you use the same strategies over and over again, it creates a unity in your drawings from one drawing to another. I'm glad you found that interesting, Umgo. What kind of paper is most useful for pen art? I wrote this on printer paper and trying to see. Yep. Look, I use an Australian brand called Art Tech, ARTTEC. It's actually a German paper that they import. It gets made in Melbourne, and it's imported and bound, cut and bound here. It's 210 GSM. It's designed for wet and dry work, so it's reasonably heavy. It's not perfectly smooth like copy paper, but it doesn't really have enough tooth for watercolor. So there's not enough tooth for the pigments to cut to sort of be even. It just ends up being very uneven. It'd be great. You could paint acrylic on it, no problem. But yeah, so that's the one I use because I've always used it and I've always liked it. I do have some watercolor books, sketchbooks, because I keep talking and planning to draw, but to learn watercolor. I'm so busy making YouTube videos that I haven't had time to. That's probably my biggest impediment to improving my art is I'm making so many YouTube videos that it takes up a lot of my time. And by the time I stop drawing for those, I really have other things that I need to be doing as well. Yeah, but I find copy paper for the sort of drawing I do with the pens I use, which are Copic. I'm not being paid to say that. I just happen to use Copic because they were the first ones I bought. I didn't realize that they were about the most expensive ones, sadly, but I got used to them. But I find that copy paper is just a bit too smooth. So it's one thing to watch a video. Actually doing it is something different. I really think we motivate you to have some of a challenge and send in the drawings or tag them. Yeah, but where would you post them, Spruce? And maybe have some sort of a review video. Yeah, I just don't know how to do that on YouTube. It's the sort of thing I could do on Instagram because I can post things onto my Instagram account that I get, say, in a DM. But the other thing is I don't want to get hundreds of drawings that I have to go through and look through and choose from or do something with, because I spend a lot of time on my phone already. I do everything. I do absolutely everything on my phone. I video, I edit, I post. No, actually, I don't post. I post on my wife's laptop, and I do my live sessions on my wife's laptop. So that's very kind of her. So I watch your video of tips for line work, and it's really helpful. Well, that's great, Laurie. That is great. Yeah, I feel like line work is one of the bigger problems that people have, and it's I think it's one of the harder ones to teach because it's so it's much easier in a one-on-one to talk about line work, because you can look at the line work that someone is doing and make suggestions as to how the line work could be different. Some of the choices could be different. But it's difficult in a video to generalize with line work, I think. But I think there's a yeah, I think there's when all the lines are drawn the same way, they all look the same. And yet our perception of edges and of even just of edges in life is different. If you see my videos on rocks, say, I talk about the fact that when we see a rock, usually or often anyway, a large rock, it's curving away from us. It's a bit like a body. You know, when you look at my fingers, yes, there's a line there that defines the form if I was making it two-dimensional, but it's, I'm just trying to find something sharp, but it's different to a sheet of paper where a line here, a heavy solid line, would be a lot more appropriate for what's visually there, because we're not really seeing an edge here. We're seeing a form that's disappearing from sight. And so possibly there's a more subtle line we can use here, even a line that varies in different parts of the length. Does that make sense? Can you understand what I'm saying? The topic is, well, that's great, Ursel. I don't know if that's even a name that's meant to be said, but I love it when people are encouraged to go back to drawing, because look, if it's inside, I mean, no one starts drawing unless there's something inside that wants to draw, that feels like this is an expression that is within them and would be fulfilling to have come out in some way. So same with brushwork. Variety is more interesting. Yeah, I think so. Oh, look, a few of you are about to get some ads, so please don't click them off. Helps me if you let them run. So that would be great. Drew one of my bulky looking tree drawings and it took a week. Well, that's great. That's great. I don't know how you took a week with any of my drawings, though. You must have drawn it a bit differently, because I guess I probably would have drawn mine in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. But that's great, because what that says to me is you used my teaching and my method as a springboard to help provoke you into, what's the expression, to creating a new response than the one I had to the same thinking and talking and the same thinking and talking and reference. Yeah. Trees are incredibly useful subjects to learn about making marks and drawing the effect. Then using this, it was. Oh, well, thank you. You know, and I think the biggest mistake people often make with trees is they start from the ground up instead of from the leaves down. Very occasionally, it's better to actually get the trunk in where it relates to other things, but if at all possible, I find it's far more accurate to draw the tree canopy in, and then it's easier to get the thickness of the branches correct. I have a video that a fairly recent video. I think it's my three top tips in drawing trees, and I think it's my best tree video because it just, I think, sums up a really good method. So if you struggle with trees, but I think trees often are a problem because we can't draw them very well with lines, and that's the problem. But they're a wonderful subject to illustrate and to think about drawing the effect of what we see. So we're not trying to draw the leaves, we're trying to draw the effect, the visual effect of the leaves. So what marks can I make that create the effect of the tree canopy? And these are the decisions that, if we just go back to our drawing style, that will help define our drawing style. Um, oh, okay. Sorry, I thought there was something there, but there wasn't. Yeah. So yeah. Well, how are we going? Any more questions? Any more questions, or do I get an early night tonight? Only 50 minutes. When drawing outside, is there a good trick to view the frame right? I always end up with slightly off-scale drawings because I wanted too much of the view on paper. Look, Spruce, I think this is one of the things really that we each have a different bias towards. So, for instance, if we were just drawing from a photo, there are some people where we always end up drawing it larger, even if we're trying to draw it the same size. And for other people, they'll always somehow end up with it going smaller than they really wanted when they were trying to draw it actual size. And I think what's really helpful is to pay attention to what our natural default is. So, for instance, I know that when I draw perspective angles, I'm likely to draw them, if it should be like this, the perspective angle, I might draw it like this. I'm inclined to not quite have the courage to push it as high as it needs to go. Now, because I know I tend to do that, I'm very wary when I'm drawing perspective angles that are actually quite steep, that I need to check them a couple of times just to make sure I have pushed it high enough, because I've learned that in those circumstances not to trust my initial kind of response. And I wonder whether that's the same thing in something such as this, is to be aware of what, when you've done a few, how are they slightly off scale? Too large, too small? Is it the positioning? Yeah. Or maybe what you have to learn to do is to, maybe your problem, and this is a problem I do see with a lot of drawings, is that as you start to sense that you're getting near to the edges of the paper, you actually start to distort what you're drawing to make it fit. You often see this on I'm just smiling because sometimes they look very funny, on drawings with buildings, often churches with very, very tall, thin, pointy steeples, where there just isn't enough paper, and so this poor steeple gets squashed flatter and it's fatter at the bottom for the, I always say, never do that. Never compromise the form to fit on the paper. Run the steeple off the paper, draw as much of it as you can, because if you keep distorting your reference to fit the paper, then that's what you're going to become better at. But if you keep losing the top of your steeples, what you'll learn to do is to draw the tower part smaller so that the scale fits for the paper. And we only learn to do that if we make ourselves do it by not compromising. So I just wonder, Spruce, whether that's why things start to distort, because the scale starts to shift, because you start to realize, oh, I'm not going to fit this in. I want to make it fit. Off scale is okay. Yeah. Look, I mean, mistakes are our way of seeing what we're going to work on next. Mistakes we need to embrace our mistakes. And that's an important thing to say to the critical voice that would want to judge us from our mistakes. Mistakes are all part of the learning process. But what we want to do is make sure we identify our mistakes so that we can then focus on what we need to see or understand or change so that we end up getting the result that we want. Yeah. The perk of drawing on daily basis is creating muscle memory for the foundation of any subject matter. Yeah, absolutely. And not just not just from drawing daily as well, but if we sit in similar subjects for a while, that is helpful too, I think. I have found it really challenging with these daily drawing videos I've been doing. Is anyone actually doing them or doing most of them? I would love to hear on the chat if you're if you're actually doing them, and if you're doing them a lot. But I've drawn all these things. I never thought I'd draw, birds and well, I drew my old boots the other day, and that was so hard because I hadn't thought like where do you start was really difficult for me. And even when I did start, it had problems, and my normal method of drawing didn't flow as easily with this subject. So doing things differently is really helpful, and it made me observe so much more carefully. It made me slow down a lot. And yeah, I don't know if anyone here drew the boots, but I had a few comments like, "Oh, I love drawing old boots and stuff." And I'd seen other artists draw them, and I thought, "Oh, how hard can they be?" Well, actually, very hard was was I'd have rather drawn the Musée du Louvre, quite frankly, was how I felt. Um, Digital drawing comes in. Oh, yes, yes, you can start to manipulate. Yes. What's the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? They're very fast. I know that. Yes, distortion, for example, start the view on the left of the paper and barely can fit the buildings on the right. Yeah, so just run off on the right, or why not start in the center and go in each direction? That way, at least, you lose an equal bit of the left and the right, which is mostly what I tend to do. Sometimes I'll start at the top. Yeah, it just depends on my starting point is just the one that I think will give me the best chance to start in proportion and stay in proportion, because whatever we start with drawing becomes our primary reference. Whatever parts we draw, we then start to measure off and whatnot. So we want to draw things that that look accurate. So we need to choose things that we can get a good have a good attempt at. Hello from Portugal. I love to draw. Only now I start learning with a teacher, but you are a reference for me. But the negative way I think is what we criticize about it. Yeah, yeah. We really have to get rid of that critical voice that says, "Oh, this is horrible. You're hopeless. Anyone can do this. You're wasting your time." Yeah, yeah. We need to speak kind words to ourselves, kind and encouraging words. I live in the Netherlands, so if it's a German brand paper, I could probably get hold of it. Yeah, I don't know I only know the Australian brand name. So, yeah. Moving away from nature drawing to man-made objects was tough for me, but it takes a fresh start. Well, Saad, for me, it was the opposite. Of course, I started with architecture and drawing all these grandiose neoclassical buildings from the major cities of Europe was where I started. And then moving to trees, and more recently to even some bushland and landscapes and natural. I think clouds was one of the biggest challenges. I don't know that it's one that I had the most success with of subjects I've drawn, but it was, again, it's good to push myself. Very, very good to push myself. So, thanks, John. That's great that you're using those daily drawing exercises. And go, you do as well. That's great. Yes, so switching to drawing nature was for me the challenge. But it doesn't matter what we switch to. It's the fact that we switch, and it shakes up our habits, our lethargy, and it forces our brain to think creatively, but in different ways. How will I create this or that? Ian put his Blundstone boots into a painting some years ago. Pretty Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, honestly, boots say a lot. They say a lot about the person. I mean, I think I mentioned in the video, my boots, these were the boots I walked around Europe in 2018 when I took most of the photos that I use of European photos on my channel. So those were the boots that helped made my channel possible. Um, Brianna's still trying to work out clouds in pen. Yes. Well, that's great. That's great, Spruce. Yep. Oh, the Netherlands. Look, I've only had a few days in the Netherlands in Amsterdam, but I just couldn't believe that Amsterdam was so beautiful, and I didn't know that. You know, except for the enormous line that we had to queue up in to go into Anne Frank's house. That wasn't so beautiful, but it was just gobsmackingly magnificent city. It was a glorious sunny day, and we sat on the edge of a canal and had a drink, and it was just wonderful in the sunshine. Uh, that's good. Been 2 years since drew with pencils, some realistic beach waves and trees. Yep, a whole lot personal improvement. Books that changed my art life. Boots that changed my art life. Yes. Draw every week in Amsterdam. Well, aren't you lucky? Yeah, yeah. And of course, we had a wonderful time at the Van Gogh Museum there. Yeah, it's a bit of a journey, isn't it? Drawing and learning to draw. And we don't want to be jumping from one thing to another all the time. And there are people where I think that becomes a problem and stops them. They don't stay in the one place enough to really refine the skills that they use in that. I often say it's important to go deep in a certain area, and then we learn the skills. Then we learn the skill of going deep. But if we do a little bit of this, little bit of that, little bit of this, we don't learn how to go deep. And that's a skill that we can transfer from pencil to pen to wash to color to anything we do. The skill of going deep. So it's good not to rush from one subject, one medium to another too much. Yeah. Even fall. Oh, you mean autumn? Because we're just coming into spring here, so we're just having our first run of 30 degree temperature days. So it's funny but nice to feel warm again. Not that our winter is any big problem compared to a lot of the world's winter. We complain when it's 15 degrees in the middle of winter. But yeah. Yes, spring. Well, any more questions? Or will we wrap this one up a bit earlier? Anything you want to ask me? Come do an American tour. Oh, look, yeah, that doing a tour anywhere sounds great. But I haven't been out much post-COVID, so I probably need to brush up on my location sketching. I actually started doing the freehand pen sketching also because I was wanting to. We had a trip coming up in 2020 that I wanted to do a lot of street sketching in pen, and so yeah, so I didn't get. We had to cancel the trip, so I never got the urban sketching in. But it's been a great skill to have developed. How do I approach tackling a new subject, and when do you know you went deep enough? Um, Look, I think you've gone deep enough when you can see the results, basically, and you kind of plateau. Then possibly without any outside input, you're not really going to go any deeper because you've started to just stay in the same place of 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 the creative kind of translation of the scene into the subject into the picture. But when you're still going deep, new possibilities keep coming to mind, and so you keep exploring them and discovering that they do or they don't work. And so there's still a kind of a movement in process that's happening. And I think part of going deep is we shake things up, is that we push things, we change things about. So tackling a new subject, I mean, as I was mentioning, I mean, my daily drawing exercises has caused me to have to look at lots of things to draw that I wouldn't have considered drawing. And so, for instance, when I draw a building like the Musée du Louvre, I don't have great problems most of the time with the proportions of the various parts. But when I drew that, if you've seen the video of that silver milk jug, my proportions still aren't great on that. It's my jug's not as tall as it should be for the width. It's a little bit of a stocky jug compared to the reference, because the reason that happened was because of the pattern on it changed the way it looked, changed the effect of the appearance. But drawing the outline without the pattern, it caused this optical illusion thing. I mean, I actually started that one 3 times, that silver jug. I normally don't start anything at all except for the drawing I do. But I have found with some of these relatively simple subjects, they're actually quite tricky because they're new, because my observation has to be new. And so I think persevering is important when it's a different subject. And certainly with my boots, I had to observe so much more carefully. Now, one of the other things I do, Mr. Mountaineer, is I what was I going to say? Yeah, and again, I have a couple of videos on this. But before every drawing, even the quick daily ones, before every drawing, I get a sheet of paper and I play around with the marks. I play around with. It's not a thumbnail. It's not composition. I explore. The first thing I do is I check the size pen I think I'm going to use for the scale, for the size I'm going to draw it. So sometimes we can start with a pen line that's either too thick or too fine for the effect we want to create. So that's the first thing I do, is I make sure that the pen's the right thickness for the sort of size. So I start to draw a little bit of this, whatever, actual size, and see whether it looks blotchy or disappears, and adjust the pen. And I also play with the marks I'm going to make as well. But when I did the boots, I actually started drawing it from the center of the top part of the tongue, and then went down past the laces, not drawing all the laces, but drawing enough of the laces, and then working out how I was going to position the rest of the boot to make sure that my method was going to work. So I had to experiment, I had to explore. And this is what I mean when I talk about going deep, pushing ourselves to apply the skills we've used, but to apply them in new ways, to refine them, and also just to improve our observation skills, rather than staying in our sort of subject matter sweet spot. I mean, horses I think are hard to draw, but if horses was what I drew every day, then by now I think I could probably draw them as comfortably as I draw grand architecture. So whatever it is we normally draw, it's, if we want to go deep, it's good to shift that sometimes, at least a bit, or maybe the context of our drawing. Simple is often very hard. Yeah. Yeah. I think because detail gives us a place to hide things that aren't quite right. Um, we can come over the top, or it's just distracting if there's a lot of detail, a lot of fuss. But something that's, try and draw an egg. If it's not right, it'll look not right. Draw a tree. It's a lot more forgiving if a little bit is not quite right. It's why, for me, the Sydney Opera House is such a challenging drawing, because it's relatively simple. It's relatively simple, but if you don't get those curves right, of those sails right, then it's wrong. And most drawings of the Sydney Opera House that I see on social media make me want to cry, because the sails look nothing like that. And I guess the problem is I've seen it so much. I when I was a little boy, I watched it being built. Went to the opening 50 years ago. They've just had this has been the 50-year anniversary of the Sydney Opera House. It's hard to believe it's an old building now. I think it still looks beautifully modern. But if you don't get the curves right, it just doesn't look the way it looks. Now, if you're not familiar with it, it may look close enough. But, how good a drawer do we want to be? And I think that's I've got a couple of videos drawing the Sydney Opera House. Okay, so Ian's got to bring his harvest in, it sounds like. I in the end didn't plant anything this year because I began to, and animals ate it all. Even my carrots, they were eating. I netted everything. I even netted the root vegetables, and things got in and began to eat down from the top down. So I just gave up. Yep, Jörn Utzon. Utzon. Yeah, 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 it is a beautiful design. All right. Well, unless anyone comes up with a question, we might call it a day. If you've been listening and haven't hit the like button yet, then please do it. It is helpful. And if you're finding my channel helpful, then please, if you've got friends who draw, please let them know as well. Crazy Swede. No, it was a crazy Dane. Actually, he had a very difficult state government to deal with. Not our finest government moment, I don't think, the way we dealt with Utzon. I tell you what, if you think the Sydney Opera House is beautiful, then Google, because it was a contest, Google second place in the Sydney Opera House, and just be grateful that we weren't stuck with that. And third place, I think, is a little bit better than second place. But I mean, second place looks like a council civic centre. It just looks appalling. Sorry if anyone's related to the architect who designed it, but it just makes you realise how fortunate we were that Utzon won. Yeah. See ya, Ali. Thanks for joining. Yeah. Well, look, I think that we seem to have. Yep. In fact, I just went to an exhibition on the Opera House at the Sydney Museum, and they had the original from the construction. They had the original blockwork of the half sphere with the blocks, the segments cut out that became the shapes of the Opera House, the ones that they used in the building process. Yeah. Okay, well, look, how do we improve in our drawing? Well, part of the way we improve, I do have difficulty to wrap it up. Part of the way we improve in our drawing is to overcome the issues that stop us drawing. So, I hope if any of the things we've talked about are ones that you have, that there's some encouragement to push through. And the truth is that really, between all of us, we all share the same sorts of issues, and we all muddle through. So you know, there are answers, there are ways through. We can do it. We can. And I hope this video on my channel is encouraging for you to push through the things that would stop your drawing improvement. Look, thanks for joining. It's been great to have you all here tonight, and I'll see you next time. But whatever you're drawing and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. Yes, but that's because you're too young, me too. I'll see you next time. Bye.